Don Quixote, written by Miguel de Cervantes in the early 17th century, is one of the most important works of world literature. The novel is about a man named Don Quixote who becomes so obsessed with reading stories about knights and their heroic deeds that he loses touch with reality. Believing himself to be a knight, he embarks on a series of adventures across the Spanish countryside. Accompanied by his loyal but simple-minded squire, Sancho Panza, Don Quixote's adventures are a mixture of comedy, tragedy, and philosophical reflection on the nature of life, imagination, and honor. The first part. The novel begins by introducing Alonso Quixano, a middle-aged man from La Mancha, Spain. Quixano spends all his time reading books about knights, chivalry, and heroic quests. Eventually, his obsession with these stories leads him to believe that he is actually a knight himself. He decides to take up arms and become Don Quixote de la Mancha. He believes it is his duty to revive chivalry and defend the helpless. Quixano finds some old armor, renames his aging horse Rocinante, and chooses a lady love, Dulcinea del Toboso, who is actually a local peasant woman named Aldonza. In his delusion, Don Quixote sees her as a noble lady who inspires his knightly deeds, even though she doesn't know of his existence. Don Quixote's first adventure doesn't go as planned. He attacks windmills, thinking they are giants, and is knocked to the ground by one of their spinning blades. This scene is one of the most famous in the book and symbolizes Don Quixote's inability to distinguish between reality and his fantasies. Next, Don Quixote meets a group of traders who are traveling through the countryside. He demands that they acknowledge Dulcinea as the most beautiful woman in the world, but when they refuse, he attacks them. However, his makeshift armor is weak, and he is easily beaten. A neighbor finds Don Quixote lying on the ground and takes him back to his village. At home, Don Quixote's friends, including the local priest and a barber, are worried about him. They think his books are to blame for his madness. In an effort to cure him, they burn many of his books and seal off his library. Don Quixote, however, believes that an evil enchanter has stolen his books and plans to continue his quest. Sancho Panza joins the quest. For his next adventure, Don Quixote convinces a local farmer, Sancho Panza, to become his squire. Sancho agrees, partly because Don Quixote promises him that he will make him the governor of an island. Unlike Don Quixote, Sancho is grounded in reality, but he is loyal to his master. Throughout the novel, Sancho serves as a comic contrast to Don Quixote's idealism and delusion. As they travel together, Don Quixote's delusions lead them into one misadventure after another. In one episode, Don Quixote comes across a group of friars and attacks them, thinking they are kidnappers. He later frees a group of galley slaves, believing they are oppressed men, only to be attacked by the very men he liberated. Despite these misadventures, Don Quixote remains committed to his quest, and Sancho follows him, growing more and more fond of his master's peculiar nature. Sancho often tries to bring Don Quixote back to reality, but his efforts usually fail. The adventure at the inn. In one of the novel's most famous episodes, Don Quixote mistakes an inn for a castle and demands to be knighted by the innkeeper, whom he believes to be the lord of the castle. The innkeeper, amused by Don Quixote's madness, humors him and performs a mock ceremony, making him a knight. Don Quixote is thrilled, although he soon gets into trouble at the inn. He ends up attacking a group of guests who he believes are evil knights. Throughout his adventures, Don Quixote's madness becomes more and more apparent. He sees every ordinary situation as a grand quest, and every person he meets as a figure from his books of chivalry. His idealism blinds him to the reality of the world around him. Return to the village. After a series of misadventures, Don Quixote is eventually brought back to his village by his friends and family, who hope to cure him of his madness. For a time, he seems to return to his senses, but it isn't long before he decides to embark on another quest. The second part. The second part of Don Quixote was published 10 years after the first and is quite different in tone. By this time, Don Quixote has become famous, and many of the characters he encounters know of his previous adventures. Some of these characters play tricks on Don Quixote, taking advantage of his madness for their amusement. Don Quixote and Sancho Panza set off again on their adventures, and once more they encounter a variety of characters who challenge their perceptions of reality. One of the main themes of the second part is the tension between reality and illusion. Don Quixote's madness is both his greatest flaw and his most endearing quality. While his actions are often foolish and even dangerous, his belief in an ideal world of honor, chivalry, and justice is also noble in its own way. Sancho's governorship. One of the central episodes in the second part involves Sancho Panza finally being given the governorship of an island, as Don Quixote had promised him. However, this island is actually a village, and the position of governor is just a trick played by a group of wealthy nobles. Despite the trickery, Sancho proves to be a wise and just ruler, making fair decisions and showing common sense. Eventually, he gives up the position, realizing that the responsibilities of governance are not as glamorous as Don Quixote had made them out to be. The Night of the White Moon. The climax of the second part comes when Don Quixote meets a rival knight, the Night of the White Moon. This knight is actually one of Don Quixote's old friends, who has disguised himself in order to challenge Don Quixote to a duel. The terms of the duel are simple. If Don Quixote wins, he can continue his quest. But if the Night of the White Moon wins, Don Quixote must return home and give up his life as a knight. Don Quixote loses the duel, and true to his word, he returns to his village, heartbroken and defeated. His dreams of being a knight are shattered, and for the first time, he begins to question the wisdom of his quest. Don Quixote's final days. Back in his village, Don Quixote falls ill. On his deathbed, he finally regains his sanity. He realizes that he is not a knight, and that his adventures were the result of madness. He renounces his previous life and makes peace with those around him. He asks for forgiveness from his friends and family, especially from Sancho, who has remained loyal to him throughout all his misadventures. Don Quixote dies a short time later, leaving behind a legacy of both humor and tragedy. His story is both a celebration of imagination and a warning about the dangers of losing touch with reality. Themes of the novel. Don Quixote explores many deep and complex themes, but one of the most important is the relationship between reality and illusion. Don Quixote's madness represents the power of the imagination, but it also shows the dangers of letting fantasy take over one's life. Throughout the novel, Cervantes plays with the idea of what is real and what is illusion, often leaving the reader to question the nature of reality itself. Another key theme is the concept of chivalry and honor. Don Quixote's actions are motivated by a desire to live up to the ideals of the knights he reads about in his books. However, those ideals are outdated, and Don Quixote's attempts to bring them to life in the modern world often lead to chaos and disaster. The novel asks whether those old ideals have any place in the real world, or if they are merely relics of a past that no longer exists. Sancho Panza serves as a counterbalance to Don Quixote's idealism. While Don Quixote is lost in his fantasies, Sancho is grounded in reality. However, over the course of the novel, Sancho also becomes more influenced by Don Quixote's idealism. By the end of the novel, the lines between reality and fantasy have blurred for both characters. Conclusion. Don Quixote is a novel that works on many levels. On the surface, it is a comic story about a man who believes himself to be a knight and goes on a series of absurd adventures. But beneath the humor, the novel also explores profound questions about the nature of reality, the power of imagination, and the struggle to live according to one's ideals in a world that often seems indifferent or hostile to them. Cervantes' work has had a lasting influence on literature, inspiring countless writers, philosophers, and artists. Don Quixote's blend of comedy, tragedy, and philosophical depth makes it one of the most enduring and beloved works in world literature. Despite its age, its themes remain relevant today, and Don Quixote's quest for meaning in a confusing and often cruel world continues to resonate with readers centuries after it was written.